In this next project, we'll focus on building an interior desk scene, and we'll take a deeper dive into some of the modeling tools in Cinema 4D. We'll also take a closer look at texturing and lighting. Now, in order to get this project started, the first thing you'll need to do is download the desk01.zip file. I've downloaded that to my desktop, and I'll unzip it really quickly, and I'll drag and drop it into my class folder. I'll get rid of my zip file. I no longer need that. And before we get started in Cinema 4D, I'll give you a quick tour of some of the assets that I've included inside the desk scene folder. So the desk scene folder is going to act as our project folder, and inside our project folder we're going to save lots of different Cinema 4D files. Inside the desk scene folder I've also included a reference folder, and this reference folder is just, it includes some assets that we can take a look at. We might model from these. I've included things like a simple pen and an example of a couple of different kinds of lamps. Now, you can definitely go find your own reference for this, but it's key that we're looking at different kinds of reference. If we start to model things just from our imagination, pretty quickly we'll run out of details when it comes to the modeling. So it's a really good idea that if we're going to model some content, that we do some research and reference what it is that we're looking at. So I also have a texture folder, a text folder, and inside the text folder I have some simple textures. We'll continue to add to this folder as we create our own textures or go find some content. But there are a couple of different textures in here, like there's an apple, a green apple, and a red apple, along with some can labels that I've created, and a couple of different logos. So in order to get this project started, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into Cinema 4D. And from Cinema 4D, before I even start creating anything, I'll do a quick file save as, and I'll give this project a home. So I'll go into my class folder, into my project folder, and I'll call this BW underscore desk01. So it's the first incarnation of my desk scene. And just to get a little bit of reference going here, I'm going to start off with a cube, and the cube is going to act as my desk. Now, I'm going to make this desk much larger than it would actually be inside the real world. So if you're keeping track of the math here, 2,000 centimeters would be an enormous desk. But I'm going to make it much bigger. I'm not going to make it to scale. It's going to be a relative scale. But I'm not so concerned about the actual real world scale of this desk. As long as everything is the same relative size, I'm not so concerned about it. And the reason I've made that decision to go much bigger is that once we get down into modeling some of the smaller details, we won't be working necessarily with decimals. So when we model the lamp or the apple or the pen, we'll be working with objects that are just a couple of centimeters, and that'll keep us from having to get into using these decimals. So when it comes to modeling things to scale, it's really not so important that we're modeling to scale at this point. If we're going to run some kind of simulation or transfer these assets into a game engine environment, it would be really important to model these things to scale. Because once objects are taken over by a physical simulation, it's really important that things aren't really huge or really small, because they start to impact the way that objects react. But as far as just modeling a scene for illustration or animation, we can usually get away with modeling things much larger to scale. And if we need to, we can always scale the entire scene down really quickly. So I have this object in place, and really quickly this is going to act as the surface of my desk. Now, I definitely want to stay organized because I'm going to have a lot of content inside my desk scene. Now, I started out with the desk, and I'll actually call this, this is my upper, or I'll call this desktop. So it's going to be the top of the desk. And I'll borrow this object. I'll do a quick copy and paste. And I'll call this just simply desk under. And I'll even move this in my hierarchy so that I have the desk on the top, and then I have this desk under object. And what I'll do is I'm just going to move that down a little bit, and I'm going to play with some of the values here to reduce it to kind of get, just to add some really simple details here. So once I'm playing around with some of these values, I'm just kind of, just rounding off some of the numbers. And the idea here is that I wanted to provide a real simple detail or real simple structure So I have a tabletop sitting on what's going to act like a frame. If I want to be really precise about this, again, I can look at this from the side view. So the front or right will do. And I'm going to change my display mode to quick shading with lines so I get a real simple idea of what's going on and what the relationship of these two objects are. Now I'll jump back into my, my perspective viewport. So I'm just really quickly going to frame out the details of the desk, and we can always go back and refine this stuff much later. So what I'm doing is I'm just making a real quick pass at some of the basic details, and I'm thinking of this new object that I created as a leg of the desk. And so I'm just roughing out some of the dimensions. Now, you may be paying attention to the dimensions that I'm using. I'm assuming you're modeling to kind of a similar scale, but this is a real opportunity for us to really kind of experiment and start to understand what's happening in the interface. So what I'm doing is I'm just roughing out one leg. I definitely want to change the height, and that feels maybe a little tall, but I really won't know until I get it in place. So yeah, it still feels a little tall. So I'm gonna just, again, I'm just running through really quickly, trying to make some real quick decisions. And the idea here is that this is going to act as a leg. Now, at this point, we should start to feel comfortable with jumping in and out of the different perspective views. I'm going to use my top-down view here to arrange the leg. And at this point, I should also start to pay attention to, I'm definitely moving content according to one axis, but when I have an opportunity to move content according to two axes, I'm definitely going to take advantage of it. So what I'm doing is I'm just looking through my wireframe view. I get an outline and I get a real clear sense of where that sort of inner leg is going to meet the frame. And I'm just using this grid that comes in this view just to get a real quick layout of my leg placement. Now, once I get this leg placed, what I'll do is I'll definitely rename this. I'll call it desk leg, and I'll copy and paste. Now, just as we did with that trick with the snowman, I can start to align content based on its positive and negative position inside this 3D space. Because I've built my desk at the origin of my 3D space, and I didn't move it around. I might have moved it up a little bit to kind of get things to align, but the center of this desk is the center of the 3D space, and because of that, I can take this copy of the leg, and I can look at its its X value, okay? So I'm looking at the red axis, and what I want to do is I want to move the copy over here, but I want to be symmetrical about this, and all I have to do is with that new copy, so I copied the leg, I'll just put a negative sign in front of the X value, and I'll hit return. Now I get an exact duplicate. Okay, and now that I've done this, I see that maybe I want to move these legs in a little bit, but I can always go back and refine this later. So I'm going to use that same technique, but this time around I'm going to shift click and select both of these legs. I'll command copy, command paste. And now what I'll do is I'll do that same trick, but this time around I'll do it with the Z. So in the foreground, these legs collectively have a position of -527 along the Z, and if I just take out that negative sign, now I have perfect symmetry in terms of those legs. They're at really kind of an awkward position in terms of, their Z position, 527 point something. I could round those down, but for the sake of this project, that's just about what I want to do for the desk. Now, in looking at this, I see that my legs are actually feeling a little bit short. So later I'll make a pass and kind of, extend those legs. But for now, this is all the basic stuff that I want for my desk. I have a platform that I can start to work on, and I have a real simple reference inside this scene. The last thing that I'll do before I move on from my desk is I'm going to start to apply some basic textures. And there's a texture library that comes with Cinema 4D. Now, if you've downloaded the student version, you will have to run an update in order to get this, this content browser that I'm about to show you. If I go to Window and I go to Content Browser, this will give me a place where I can go find some pre-packaged materials, and I'll leverage that while I have it. I'm going to go into Presets, and from Presets I'll look into Prime. And from Prime, I'll go into Materials, and from Materials, I'll just click on the basic folder. And when I do that, you can see that there's a list of materials on the right side. And there's some basic things in here like wood, metal, and stone. And if I just scroll through here down there in alphabetical order, I can see that there's this wood. And I'll take one of these dark wood textures, and rather than dragging it straight to the object, what I'll do is I'll just double click. Once I double click, that loads the texture inside the material manager. Now remember, if you have not downloaded the content browser, and by default, if you're using the student version of Cinema 4D, it by default does not come with the content browser. And so what you'll need to do is you're going to need to go to the help menu and check for updates. Cinema 4D will check for updates, and it'll let you know that the content library is available for download. And it's about 4 gigabytes, so it's a really big library. There's lots of stuff in there. But I want to take advantage of this. And what I'll do is not only do I want a wood texture, but I'll start off with just a real simple metal texture as well. So I'll go back to the content browser. I'll go into Preset, Prime, Materials, Basic. And in here, I'll just select one of these metals that are fairly flat. There's different metals in here. And I'll double click. So now I have the basic material that I want to use for this frame object and the legs. And so I'll just take this and I'll drop this on desk under. And then I also want to apply this to the legs. And rather than applying this material individually to all these legs, it kind of makes sense that we would select all these legs. I'll hold down Option G to group, or I'll go to the Object pull-down menu and choose to group objects. Now I have a group object. I'll call this desk legs, and I'll just drag and drop that material onto my desk legs. The only thing left that I have to do is to apply the wood texture to the top of the desk, and we'll give that a quick render and see what that looks like. Now you can use any texture that you want for the top of the desk, and in fact I'm not sure I'll stick with this texture, and in fact I'll want to kind of change the grain. This reads more like a wood floor than kind of a clean desktop. But I'll continue to tinker with that, and we'll take a look at how to adjust some of these textures in space. But we'll do that a little bit later in this presentation. For now, what we want to do is just rough out a really simple desk that will act as a platform for the rest of our content. We'll then start to model a few things. In the next presentation, we'll start to model a pen and some paper, and then we'll start to think about the entire environment. We'll throw some basic lighting, a floor, and some walls in the scenes so that we can really start to get a feel for our environment. But we'll start to look at those things in the next presentation.